separation without self-determination is apartheid. What is apartheid? The translation of the concept of apartheid is separation. And the concept used by the Israeli government, and unfortunately used even more by the Israeli peace forces, is the concept of separation. In fact, the separation is the aim of everything. It's not a mean, but an aim. And you can separate on the basis of two equal entities, then you have self-determination. But if you separate and one is controlling, you have apartheid. And what is now in the ground is a situation of apartheid.
I understand you're a critic of the Oslo Accords. Could you explain why you're opposed to the accord?
I am less critical to the Oslo Accord than to the way they were applied. I had, I must admit, illusions concerning these agreements, believing that though they were far from being perfect, and in fact they were not good, but at least they had the potentiality to open the road for new kind of relationship between Israel and the Palestinians, and ultimately leading to the end of the Israeli occupation. 2 years after, it's quite clear that these accords failed, if they ever intended to create a minimum of equal relationship, or at least I will say relationship based on some kind of respect for the Palestinians. These are agreements based not only based on very unfavorable relation of forces, but also imposed on the Palestinians. In fact, there are no negotiations. The Israelis are fixing the agenda, the demands, and they are already leaving a small space to negotiate. In this framework, the result is a Palestinian entity or Palestinian entities under Israeli control of the land, control of the resources, control on the borders, in fact controlling everything, and leaving to the Palestinian the duty to keep law and order in their own community. It is the post-Oslo and post-Oslo B situation in the West Bank and in Gaza is the same in a sense than before, in the sense that it's still Israeli domination on the land, Israeli domination on the water, Israeli domination on the everything which is entering and going out from the territories administered by the Palestinians. It's the Israeli army which is controlling most of the territory in the West Bank and a substantial part in the Gaza Strip. In that sense, it is still an Israeli domination on the whole of the West Bank and Gaza. The difference is that the administration of the Palestinian population and the police on the Palestinian population is Palestinian responsibility. In a sense, it's the best agreement possible for Israel, controlling the situation, controlling the territory, but not having to be involved day to day in the life of the Palestinians without any responsibility, released from the responsibilities, even the minimum responsibilities they used to have in the past, in terms of providing a minimum of standard of living, in terms of being responsible of the health administration, the welfare administration, the education. Now they don't have even this formal responsibility.
Why, you said maybe that the early agreement, Oslo I, had some hopeful potential. Can you explain what that hopeful potential of Oslo I was, and how is it negated by the Cairo Agreement?
There were two things. First, there was a preambulum to the Declaration of Principles, which was full of good formulations, speaking about 100 years of conflict, which put the problem where it is when Zionism started in the area, speaking about opening a new page of reconciliation, having the UN declarations as a basis for the negotiation, which means the illegality of the occupation, the illegality of the settlements. This is one reason or one aspect of what could have been used in a positive way. The second, which was the most important, in my opinion, was a very tight timetable. And my assumption, and the assumption of quite many people, was that with such a timetable, they can only move forward if they respect the timetable. There were very few concrete elements in the DOP, very few, but there was a timetable. And in order to reach from A to B and from B to Z, you have to move forward. From the moment the Israeli Prime Minister decided that there are no holy dates and that the timetable has no meaning, the whole agreement had no meaning. From that moment, Israel was able to say, take it or leave it all the time, and if you don't want, we'll renegotiate in a year. And this is what happened during the last 2 years. To summarize this point, my assumptions concerning the DOP were based on this concept of timetable. From the moment you take it off, you have no agreement whatsoever. You have a series of open negotiations without fixing at all what is the ultimate goal, and all this under very unfavorable relation of forces.
However, some people have argued, this is a bad agreement, but it could lead to something possibly better. That there's some possibility, okay, if the Palestinians particularly, if we accept this agreement, we're getting our foot in the door, and somehow it's the first step to perhaps establishing a Palestinian state. What do you say to this argument?
This was exactly my understanding 2 years ago, not now, 2 years ago, that such an agreement, if respected, could have been a door open for achieving, not in a direct way, and maybe not too fast, but in achieving Palestinian self-determination, or at least sovereignty on the occupied territories. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Even the few which was written in the agreement was not respected. To take only one example, in the agreement, in the DOP, one of the very few concrete articles was that the displaced Palestinians, meaning the refugees from 1967 and later, will come back. This was agreed, as it was agreed in the Camp David agreement. And there was a commission, the article was speaking about a commission with Jordan, Egypt, Palestinians and Israelis to decide the modalities of the return and to be sure that those who will return indeed are from 67 and not, God forbid, refugees from 1948. The Israeli new interpretation, which is a blatant falsification of the agreement, is that the role of the committee is to decide whether or not they will come back, not to decide the concrete application of the agreement. So it means that under the present relation of forces, even what was agreed is not necessarily what will happen, and it's only a matter of relation of forces. And as long as the Palestinian people is not able, or as long as its leadership is not ready to create again a relation of forces by mobilization, by appealing in an offensive way to the international public opinion, to Israeli public opinion, and by remobilizing its own people, the Israelis will be able to impose their way, and their way is not bringing to Palestinian sovereignty. Now, concerning Palestinian state, state is an abstract concept. You can call everything a state. In fact, Bantustans were called states by the apartheid administration. I believe that the Israeli government sooner or later will accept the idea of a Palestinian state. The problem is whether this state, in inverted commas, has the characteristics of sovereignty, deciding upon its own population, upon its own borders, and borders here are very important. Where this state will be, what will be the geographical border, will it be the whole of the West Bank, which is out of question from an Israeli point of view, or only 2/3 of it, which in my opinion is what is more and more the Israeli plan, is less important than what will be the scope of the Palestinian sovereignty in this state. And according to all what has been achieved until now, this is a sovereignty extremely limited.
You use the word apartheid and Bantustans. Apartheid's a pretty loaded word. Do you think that the situation here is looking more like apartheid, and how is that separation being enforced through this new agreement?
Separation without self-determination is apartheid. What is apartheid? The translation of the concept of apartheid is separation. And the concept used by the Israeli government, and unfortunately used even more by the Israeli peace forces, is the concept of separation. In fact, the separation is the aim of everything. It's not a mean, but an aim. And you can separate on the basis of two equal entities, then you have self-determination. But if you separate and one is controlling, you have apartheid. And what is now in the ground is a situation of apartheid. What is the intention, or seems to be the intention of the Israeli leaders, of most of the Israeli leaders today in the government, is to crystallize under the name of a Palestinian state, and maybe even a flag and a seat at the United Nations, a situation of apartheid. A state or territories which will be autonomous, which will have their own self-rule and their own police, but under the total control, not only on the level of security, but on the level of borders, economy, what enters, what goes out, on the level of unilateral decided agreements, relation between Israel and Palestine. This is apartheid. It's not whether it will develop into apartheid. This is apartheid.
How are the Palestinian and Israeli population kept apart from each other on the ground? You know, how does this look?
The main symbol of the post-Oslo situation, and essentially even more so after Taba agreement, the Oslo B agreement, is the checkpoint. The checkpoint and the permit. And this is a paradox. While at a time during the occupation there was more or less freedom of movement for Palestinians and Israelis everywhere, now Palestinians cannot move. Now, we can imagine a situation where two states decide to close borders. But it's a unilateral decision. I was invited by Palestinian administration to Gaza for, as an Israeli, for a symposium. The Israelis will decided that I cannot enter Gaza. Or in fact, the way I said, you cannot decide anything concerning Gaza. You can only say I cannot go out to Gaza. But so it's a mere falsification to claim that separation is an expression of sovereignty. It is an expression of sovereignty when it's mutual. If the Palestinian can decide who is entering or not the Israeli territory, their own territories, and the Israelis will decide who is entering or not their own territory, and if, as it was clearly, explicitly expressed in the Declaration of Principle of Oslo, there will be a safe passage between all the parts of the Palestinian administered territories, then you can say separation is part of a sovereignty, and a state has the right to decide to close its borders. But if one is deciding not only who can enter the other state, but even who can pass from one part of this entity to the other, it means that the state, the Palestinian administration, has no authority whatsoever on its own population and territory.
Yesterday we saw this kind of irony as the PA was coming into Bethlehem, just down the road in Helhul. There were demonstrations against the building of more settlement roads. And I'm wondering what you see as the role, what will happen with the settlements under this new agreement, and how will that fit into this kind of apartheid system?
The main contradiction in the Declaration of Principles was the fact that in this Declaration of Principle, the settlements were not touched. And everyone was aware. The Israeli negotiators, the Palestinians, most of the Israeli and foreign public opinion, and the Palestinian, that there was a contradiction. You cannot have Palestinian autonomy, real autonomy, while on the same time you have settlements and settlers who are outside the autonomy in the autonomous territory. It's not a military basis you can close by a border, by a fence, and then you say, I don't touch this place. It's still part of the, it's reminiscent of the old occupation. Settlers are citizens, are civilians. They go, and with them, they have the Israeli sovereignty. They move Israeli sovereignty everywhere. So it's making a joke of autonomy. This is why 90%, I am convinced, of the politicized people, including the far right in Israel, who oppose the agreement, were convinced that the only way to make the Declaration of Principle workable was to change, if not in the agreement, in reality, this question of settlements. To amend, I will say, the agreement, the settlement part of the agreement, the settlement article, to amend it in fact, in reality. What happened that it was exactly the other way around. The whole agreement was amended according to this one specific article. Because the settlement has to stay, and they will stay, then we are sorry, but there will be no withdrawal from Gaza, but only a redeployment. That there will be no withdrawal from the West Bank, but only redeployment. And that there will be Area A and B and C. All these long negotiations were long precisely because this article of settlements and keeping the settlements not only in the territory, but under total Israeli control, wherever they are moving, under Israeli sovereignty, and in a situation like an embassy outside the control of the Palestinian Authority, and when they are spread all over the West Bank and most of the Gaza Strip, it's making a nonsense of the concept of autonomy. There is no autonomy except autonomy on the people, but not on the territory.
You had mentioned that you think 90% of the people thought that withdrawal from the settlements was important, part of the agreement, even some of the right wing. Why then would the Israeli government not withdraw from the settlements?
I think there are two reasons why the alternative choice was made, meaning that the settlements will stay, and then you adapt the whole agreement according to this article. The first one is, I will say, the obvious one, the petty one. Settlements are cheap for bargaining, are petty cash to bargain, like the prisoners. And you don't give anything for free. This is the Israeli conception of the negotiation, that it is a zero-sum game. Everything you gain, I lose. Everything I keep, you lose. And then we bargain. We keep Hebron because tomorrow we want to keep Jerusalem. Maybe we'll give you the few settlements inside Hebron. In exchange, you will admit the existence of Kiryat Arba, or you will accept Jewish Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem. This is one part, but I think there is a second reason which is deeper. It's a deep conception in Zionism ideology and culture, I will say, that wherever you are, you stay, unless you don't have any more choice. And you keep as long as you can. And it's not a matter even because the settlers want. We have many examples of settlers and whole settlements who asked after the DOP to go back home, to be dismantled. And the government say, no, you stay. So it's a big lie to say that the government would have had a more liberal position or more open position concerning the settlements, but there were pressure from the settlers. On the contrary, the government would have support, not even pushed, but support those settlers, or help those settlers who were ready to leave and are still ready to leave now. Then it would have created a dynamic of the settlements leaving by themselves, at least most of them, and isolating the hardcore of the right-wing settlers. So it was a political choice to keep the settlements there. Now, I have more and more the impression that though there was no premeditated plan during the Oslo negotiation and after, but slowly there is a plan which is emerging, a plan which they didn't dream about it 2 years ago, and now they are convinced they can obtain it from the negotiation with the Palestinians. It is to accept the idea of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and in Gaza, but after the West Bank and Gaza will be redefined according to the settlement map. Meaning, like Ehud Barak, the new Minister of Foreign Affairs and the former Chief of Staff, say the first day or the second day of his new post, being in the new post, saying, we want a compromise with the Palestinians. The compromise will be without Jordan Valley, without Greater Jerusalem, which is not only Jerusalem, but the whole area, 15% of the West Bank around Jerusalem, and without the settlement blocks, meaning the areas where there are fair amount of settlers and settlements, like in the Etzion block, like in the Trans-Samaria Road, the western part of the Trans-Samaria Road, and along the Green Line, this will be annexed to Israel. So you want a Palestinian state, you will get it. But redefine the border between Israel, the ceasefire border, which themselves were illegal, we'll redefine it, but this time with the agreement of the Palestinians. And then we'll have a West Bank of 2/3 and a Gaza Strip of 2/3 of the original West Bank and Gaza. It's a compromise in the compromise. The Palestinians offered to the Israeli what they call the historical compromise. Though Palestine is Palestinian, we are ready to share it and to divide it according to the 67 boundaries. When this was stated, then the Israelis said, now let's start negotiating. You already gave up the western part of Palestine, what was Israel before 67. Now let's negotiate what will be the future of the West Bank, how much you will have and how much will be annexed to Israel. And the main part will be the settlements around Jerusalem, in and around Jerusalem on the one hand, the Etzion block in the south, the Trans-Samaria Road in the north, and few kilometers along most of the Green Line, that is the line between old Israel and the West Bank.
This seems to pose, a lot of different problems. One is, what alternative do the Palestinians have to accepting 2/3 of the West Bank? Some people have suggested moving towards a binational state system. What do you think of the binational state idea, or what kinds of alternatives do you see this situation?
I think that the question of binationalism as an alternative to the present negotiation is not the correct way to present the question. I think there are many levels. First question is, what if there was, what was the alternative to negotiating Madrid and then after Oslo? And this is a very strong point. Did the Palestinians have any margin of maneuver after the Gulf War, after the realignment of most of the Arab states in under the American umbrella, and after the decision by the American to establish a new order in this area under the total hegemony, and imposing to the Palestinians to be part of it, as Secretary of State Baker said, take it or leave it. You go in the train or you stay in the station. And I believe that after so many years of occupation and of struggle and resistance, the capacities of the Palestinian people inside, and after so many defeats outside, from Jordan to Beirut, the abilities to recreate in the short term relation of forces, making the Palestinians able to impose their own agenda in the negotiation, or to negotiate even the agenda, was very narrow. I was not convinced until now that there was an alternative, basically, to the principle of being part of a negotiation going on. Now, I don't want to be clever after facts, and I don't have the responsibility of the Palestinian leadership. There were some alternative ways proposed or suggested by Palestinian intellectuals and politicians. For example, why not to let Jordan negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians? Saying, we have nothing to negotiate. You want to negotiate a peace treaty, negotiate with Jordan, and then after the Palestinians will resolve the problem with the Jordanian. This was an option which could have been thought. Another option was not to rush in the negotiation for power, and to accept the principle of a ceasefire with the Israelis, and letting the Israelis decide how long this ceasefire will go on according to what will move on the ground. One thing I am convinced, that the whole negotiation, as negotiation, even if we accept the principle, or that it was wise, or maybe the only way was to negotiate with Israel, the negotiation were and are still conducted in a very unprofessional way. There have been plenty of alternatives. This is the only part where I can be very clear. The rest, I don't know, and I know how difficult it is for the Palestinian leadership to decide. And I want to be modest on that point. But on one point, I am not ready to be modest whatsoever. There have been plenty of opportunities to renegotiate and to improve the relation of forces in the negotiation themselves. Like, for example, after the massacre in Hebron. The dismantling of, at least of the settlement inside Hebron, which would have helped avoiding a lot of problems in the negotiation of Taba, was possible. In the government there was a majority, in the Israeli public opinion in majority, in worldwide public opinion a majority. I believe that on the question of Jerusalem, much more could have been done. Not to obtain negotiation on Jerusalem now, but at least to obtain some kind of freeze in Jerusalem, or at least in Greater Jerusalem, which is part of the West Bank, even according to the Israelis. I believe that there is one false conception which is behind the Palestinian negotiation strategy, that they don't have any choice and the Israelis have all the choices, which is not true. Which is not true. I can easily imagine Palestinians saying, you know what, we didn't reach an agreement, please go back to Gaza. And then you will see the Israelis rushing after the Palestinians saying, okay, let's talk again. So this is on the level of the negotiation themselves. I think it's too early to say that the option of statehood disappeared completely. I don't think that there is any situation which is irreversible. The same way even when I was more optimistic, I didn't believe that the process to a Palestinian independent state now with Oslo is irreversible. I don't think that now it is irreversible, that there will be no state, no statehood with a minimum of symbols and content of sovereignty. But what I would say is that the way it is moving now requests to adapt at the present level, I will say on the level of more political discussions and more strategical thought, to a situation where there is one control, one state with a Palestinian autonomy, and then the demands which are similar or parallel to the demands in South Africa are relevant, of one state, a binational state. The concept of binationality is more relevant, let's say, than 3 years ago, when it was the perspective of Palestinian statehood looks more realistic and more on the agenda and mobilizing the people. It's early to provoke a move. I think most of the Palestinians which are thinking about this, Palestinian intellectuals, Palestinian left-wing activists, and some Israelis, thinking in terms of binationality, I think no one raised it as an immediate option, but more as a vision and an alternative to the situation created right now, which may change. Many things can happen. And I am not at all a determinist person. I believe that new relational forces can be recreated quite fast. I believe that even in the dominated Palestinian territories, a new resistance can emerge, or a new movement can emerge, which can change again the agenda of the negotiations, not in next year, but less than 10 years. Speaking in terms of justice, and not what is feasible in a reasonable future, but in terms of justice, which in my opinion should always be in our mind, while at the same time discussing what is possible. In terms of justice is to recognize the first condition, the first element, is to recognize unconditionally the right of the whole of the Palestinian people to live as a people in Palestine. Already there will be no possibility and no meaning to dream about coming back to their own houses, which do not exist anymore, and their own villages, which do not exist anymore. But at least to be able to have the right to live in their land as a people is the precondition of justice. And to rebuild, I would say reshape Palestine or Israel-Palestine in a way where the two people of this land, the Palestinian people and the Israeli people, which developed in this country, being as two national entities on one land. What is the concrete translation of such an algebraic formula is, for me, not so relevant. Will it be one state, binational state, cantons, a federation, autonomy, the two concepts of autonomy in one structure? Will it be connected even to Jordan? I think this is already leaving the question of justice to the question of realpolitik. On the question of justice, it is the fact that there are two peoples, which one because it's historical fatherland, and the other because it is here and living here and developing roots here, new and weak, still weak, but already roots here, are legitimate and has to recognize the legitimacy of the other here. In order to achieve justice, the first condition, I will say, from the Israeli side, and we have no symmetry between Israelis and Palestinians, is to recognize this fact and to recognize its own responsibility in the conflict. It's not, and this is one of the main outrage, I will say, in the Oslo Declaration of Principle and what was around it, as if there was a big misunderstanding, a big conflict between two equally right national struggles. No, we had a foreign colonial movement coming here and dispossessing a population and a people from its land. And the same way the Japanese are asking forgiveness from the Korean, the same way the Swiss now asking forgiveness for the Jewish people for not having been too active in defending them during World War II. I think if there will be a new kind of relationship between Israelis and Palestinians when the Israeli people, through its government, will come to the Palestinians and say, we ask for forgiveness. You cannot repair what has been destroyed, but you can build a real relation of coexistence and respect only when the Israeli people will ask forgiveness for the Palestinians. The problem with the Declaration of Principle with Oslo was that the Israeli imposed to the Palestinians to ask forgiveness to the Israelis. They had to say to renounce terrorism. What does it mean to renounce terrorism? It's not renouncing terrorism in the future, which is obvious. You negotiate, you have a ceasefire, you don't fight. But this should have been mutual. No. The demand to renounce terrorism, where the so-called Israeli peace forces were the strongest to ask for, is in fact to relate to the past. We have been terrorists. You were right, and we attack you without justification. Now, we will not do it again. We will be good boys. And this is an outrage. It's rewriting history and imposing on the victim to accept the conception of history or the myth of the occupier.
You mentioned some criticisms of the Palestinian Authority in their strategies and methods. In general, what do you think of the emerging Palestinian Authority, and how effective do you think they can be in this process?
I wouldn't be replace the Palestinian leadership in the impossible task which they took upon themselves. And I am happy not to be, but this is also the reason why I think we have to be very cautious when we criticize what they are doing. They are in an impossible condition where they don't have the means, and I don't speak only about money, and I don't speak mainly about money. The means, meaning the ability to legify, to rule according to what they believe should be the good choices for their own people. They are totally, on every aspect of their life, under the Israeli diktat. So even if they do their best, they cannot do a lot. They cannot even protect their own residents to be expelled from the territories where they are. People who deserve, according to any standard of human rights, deserve family reunification, are considered by Israel as foreigners, and every month there is a list to the Palestinian Authority, please kick out these people, they came as tourists, they have to leave. Even on that level. They have no right to decide about what kind of economic contracts they can have, because all the contracts are determined in the various economic agreements and according to Israeli priorities. On the level of human rights and security, they are in a permanent blackmail by the Israelis that if they don't show a strong hand, an iron fist against their own population, then there will be closure. That means that the life in the West, or closure inside the closure, or tougher closure, meaning that the life inside the West Bank and Gaza, or in the Gaza Strip and from now on in the West Bank, will be unbearable. And there will be no money which Israel according to its own signature, is always conditioned by more repression. So the Palestinian Authority is pushed to play the Israeli game. They don't want it, I am sure, but they are a kind of arm of the Israeli policy in their own people. This is an unbearable situation. Their hope is, but I think it's a hope without a lot of cover, that as soon as they will have control of most of the West Bank, which is not the case now, then they will be able to resist the pressures of the Israelis. Until now, they have not been able to resist any pressure, and which will sooner or later delegitimize this authority in the eyes of their own people, because they cannot deliver any real improvement. So they deliver one improvement, it's security for the people. They don't have, hopefully, in Gaza they don't have any more, in most of the Gaza Strip, and hopefully in most of the West Bank cities and villages, direct Israeli presence, which means a permanent situation of insecurity. But people, human beings, are the kind of animals who very quickly forget these kind of things. In few months, in few years, in few months in Gaza, and in a couple of years in the West Bank, people will consider it to be normal, to be secure, because this is a normal way to live. And then they will say, okay, but what did we obtain concretely? An improvement in our economical situation? No. An improvement in our ability to decide about our own life, if not our own resources, at least our life. Can I live with my wife, for example, which was forbidden by the Israelis for 25 years? If this will not improve, there is no reason why the Palestinian population will accept the Israeli repression through the Palestinian police.
You mentioned the economics of the situation. How do you think Oslo 1 and 2 will change the economic situation for the Palestinians, or if at all? And what are the economic benefits to Israel?
From the Palestinian side, there were plenty of hopes and dreams that a lot of money by the donors' country will come, and a lot of investment, and that there will be paradise. Concretely, the situation deteriorated, not improved. In Gaza, the situation today is much worse than before Oslo. Small sectors get richer. The majority of the population do not have any more work, which they used to have before the Gulf War inside Israel. They cannot look for work outside because Israel is controlling the borders, and because outside the Gulf countries are closed now, and in Jordan there are no jobs. So in instead of improvement on the economical level, which could have somehow balanced the disappointments concerning sovereignty and symbols, we have a negative result on every side except security. More security for the Palestinians, but less, no economic improving, no improving in terms of the feeling of respect and real autonomy that I decide for myself. We decide as the people for ourselves. On the Israeli side, on the other hand, they are behaving as a mafia. As a mafia, meaning that every racketing the donor's country, every penny or every dollar coming promised to the Palestinians by the donors' countries, or every project, they took their share. And they got already the dividends of the peace without achieving peace. Israel obtained now a certificate of good behavior and of a peaceful country, which is improving always investments and support and loans. While in Gaza we have unemployment of 50%, according to some figures. In Israel we have a yearly growth of 6%, which is one of the highest in the world, much higher than any country in Europe. So I think the Israelis can make, until now, for the last 2 years, very, very positive balance sheet of their move. They got the international and the Palestinian okay for controlling the West Bank. Now it's even legitimate, and legitimate by the victims themselves, to control the whole of the Palestine, while on the other hand they don't have to dirty their hands because there is a Palestinian police, and money is going in. The only thing which is bizarre is how the Israeli people does not unanimously support the government who did such a thing, because no other government could have obtained something better.
Speaking of lack of government support, what do you think the effect of the Rabin assassination will have on Israeli society? What effect does that have on Israeli society?
On the level of Israeli-Palestinian and Israeli-Arab relations, the assassination of Rabin will not have any negative impact, maybe even some positive impact. The fact that Shimon Peres is now the head of the government may be a sign that Israel will move with more determination to realize its own agenda. And not peace, but its own agenda, because Rabin, until the last moment, was not convinced that it was good, although it seems to be obvious that it is good for Israel. But for Rabin it was not clear. Maybe he was making too much compromise, maybe he could have obtained more. All the time he was hesitating, one step forward and then going back. This explains also all the violations of the agreement. With Peres, I believe there will be less violations, and I think more respect for the timetable, because Peres believed that this is the good option for Israel, and they should proceed and to achieve the maximum the quickest possible. Internally, we will have now, and we are witnessing, a very strong attempt by all the political establishment and by public opinion makers to try to reshape a national consensus, to reshape national unity, which has been weakened during the last decade, after the Gulf, during the invasion of Lebanon, and after. In a sense now, the far right will be isolated by the right, and the government will accept, is in fact proposing to the right, even to the more right-wing parties, like the National Religious Party and Summit, a contract for the next years, saying what has been decided now, negotiated and agreed upon until now, is accepted by everyone. Concerning the future, we have time. And we will not go, at least we will not start anything new before the elections, and after we'll see. Which show once again that all the timetables has no meaning, and the signature has no signature ever. It's a government, it's a state of liars, and it's something which has to be said. While in international public opinion, the Arabs are liars and the Israelis always saying the truth. They are lying from A to Z from the first day of the signature. And if they didn't intend to lie all the time, the Palestinians show them that they can lie as much as they want, they will still go on negotiating. This is where is the Palestinian responsibility on this big manipulation.
So you don't think that the right, it wasn't the far right or the right wing that was placing limitations on Rabin as far as how far ahead, much forward he could move?
Not at all. No. Not at all. It was not the far right or the settlers who were putting pressure on the government while renegotiating what was already agreed, while not moving forward. It was a decision by the government or by a Rabin faction in the government. We have some reasons to believe that some things, some elements will change with Peres. It's not true now, and maybe this will be part of the agreement with the far right to keep the Rabin line, although it is not the Peres conception. This is still open. Peres understands more the importance of the legitimacy of Arafat in his own people. And as the same way Peres was very well aware during the last 2 years, not humiliated publicly Arafat, what was not the case with Rabin, was treating him as a nasty boy. Peres, I think, will avoid this kind of, and it doesn't cost money. It doesn't cost anything. It costs a small psychological effort. I think Peres is more aware that releasing of prisoners is a minimum which has been to be done, and the cost is negligible compared if in exchange you can impose your economic diktats or a limitation of the right of the Palestinian to move. But it was never the street in Israel which decided, almost never, which decided the agenda. It has been the government and the hesitation of the government and the clear indication towards the settlers that they will not move gave to the settlers and to the far right the energy which was very much weakened after Oslo, to give back the energy that they can impose all the time improvements in the negotiation and serve, in fact, the government ability to negotiate. What is sad is not that the settlers were, and we never have had big demonstrations since Oslo. 20,000 was the maximum, 25,000. Essentially settlers and the supporters in the far right, not the bulk of the right voters. They never demonstrated. But this is, I will say, fair. Yani. It's fair, you negotiate and you create a public opinion which is pushing you to negotiate in a tougher way. What is sad is that the Palestinians didn't do anything of that kind. On the contrary, when there have been opportunities for mobilization, like after Hebron, like during the strike of the prisoners, or every time Israelis violated blatantly the agreement, like, for example, with the release of the prisoners, where they signed that every women prisoner will be released, and then they said, sorry, we cannot, because our president is not ready to sign the pardon, instead of using Palestinian public opinion, using the Palestinian anger, using the Palestinian readiness to mobilize, like a year ago exactly with land seizures in Khader and other places, to calm the people and saying, let us negotiate, stay home. This is not only criminal, it's stupid. the most important and positive development in Israel since its creation is the fact that we don't have anymore a national consensus, or we don't have a consensus as strong as in the past. The Israeli society has been, for 2 generations, a consensual society where there was one truth, one set of totems and taboos, one history, which was a huge falsification, and no dissidents except marginal elements, which I am proud to be part of. And this situation, which started before the state, the creation of the state, lasted until the 73 war. With the collapse of the defense lines of the Israeli army in 1973, the whole confidence in the state structures, in the state leadership, whatever is the leadership, and in the truth and the totems of this society collapsed. It didn't appear in one moment. It's a process which opened and which exploded during the Lebanese war, when for the first time this people was deeply divided on a war. And I believe that this is a very positive phenomenon, although we used to emphasize the positive alternatives or the progressive alternatives to the old consensus, but there are also very reactionary and fundamentalist alternatives. The existence of thousands and thousands of Israelis questioning, for example, the idea of a Jewish state, questioning intellectually, of sociologists debating maybe a new kind of society, a new kind of state where the Palestinians are really integrated. Even the legitimacy of the concept of binationality, which is still marginal, but it's legitimate to discuss it even in very respectable publications and in the universities. All these are very positive phenomena. The fact that the army is not holy as in the past, the fact that for soldiers, if you don't go to the army, for youngsters, if you don't go to the army, you don't have the stigma you used to have in the past. All these are positive elements. The murder of Rabin is another expression, but a very tragic one, or very violent one. The existence of a current, a political, ideological current, which also have its own set of loyalties, which are not the classical one, but very reactionary one. Loyalty to the to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel according to the Jewish law, and to the interpretation of the Jewish law by fundamentalist rabbis. So we have a polarization in the society, a process of polarization, and the real battle for the 21st century, in my opinion, is not whether there will be a consensus or not. I think it's a futile attempt now to rebuild it will work for a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, but I will say on the longer range, the consensus is falling into pieces. On the one hand, it's clear what will be the alternative. The right wing in Israel will be a fundamentalist right wing, aggressive against the Arab world, destroying any hope of a peace relation between Israel and the Arab world, and the Palestinians, and therefore with the Arab world, destroying the so-called or partial democratic relations inside Israel and democratic institutions inside Israel, trying to impose a society and a state according to religious principles and led by the Torah, led by the Jewish law. The only alternative can be an alternative on the other side, which will question, from a radical alternative point of view, the old consensus. And here, as usual in Israel, the left, or the progressive part of the society is well behind the right wing. The right wing already have its future agenda. On the left side, on the other hand, it's still the dominant discourse is still to try to go back to the old good days, which never have been good. One challenge for the Israeli society and for the new generation is to redefine, if possible, an identity, an Israeli identity, which will not be defined by the conflict. Not only those who are in a conflict with the Arabs, in a situation where there will be no conflict. What is to be an Israeli? And it's not clear at all whether this challenge will be met, whether we may have a dismantling of this society. And this is a threat for many of the Zionist leaders. Some even claim that they need the conflict in order to keep it united. I believe that, from my point of view, that there are two directions around which an Israeli identity should be built. It is first to go back to some of the old Jew, to recreate the roots which have been destroyed, sometimes in a way which is reminding anti-Semitism, to Jewish culture in Central Europe, Jewish culture in the Arab countries, values which were not the Jewish values. I don't think there are something like Jewish values. There have been many kind of contradictory values during the time in the space. But some of these values, this is on the one hand. On the other hand, to clearly open ourselves to where we are in the East. We are not in Brooklyn. We are not in London. We are in the Arab East. And if we want to build a future, we have to be part of this environment, to admit to be part of it, to accept it, and to build bridges with the Arab reality of our environment.